In 2017, we had such an amazing year in Virginia. Do you agree, Karen?
Yes, absolutely.
So we had 11 women elected to the House of Delegates. It was phenomenal. When I ran for office and I quit my job, threw everything on the line, I thought, oh my God, I'm gonna lose it. Just literally lose it. Not only the race, but everything else, you know, trying to keep myself collected. But then I found out what was important, the things I was running for, like Medicaid expansion, and running for my children, you know, so that they could see leadership in various forms, because our community was just so divided after the election of Trump. I just felt disheartened. We had the Women's March, we had, you know, it was just it was a time where you just felt so conflicted. And the other thing I was running on was the Equal Rights Amendment. I believe that women should have equal work for equal pay. And this year, we're on the precipice of history. Now, you being a delegate, serving in the House way before I got there,
yes,
you know what it's like to feel marginalized, you know, in a climate that just wasn't built for women.
Not at all. Not at all.
And just the Equal Rights Amendment was something that will change all that. It will be the game changer. And we're hoping that Virginia becomes the 38th state. What do you think about that, Karen?
I think it's exciting, and I'm very hopeful that this will come about. It's been a very long battle that many people and many generations have been involved in. I actually met Alice Paul many years ago. She came to she was in the Northern Virginia area, and it was wonderful because she spoke about writing the Equal Rights Amendment. It was changed after 1923, but in fact, it was much longer at the time. And then she rewrote it and simplified it, I think is probably the best word for it. But now I think we're all set, and people are feeling it nationwide. So Virginia, it would be wonderful for Virginia to be the 38th.
I think you're absolutely right. I know what it's like being in the moment of this. When you talk about things that we're doing now, we're standing on women's shoulders throughout history. I mean, when Alice was creating the 19th Amendment to ratify it, to give us our right to vote, I mean, you know, Lisa, you know, she told stories. I mean, you've seen the movies, you've seen history where women were drugged from Washington, D.C. in the dead of winter simply because they wanted the right to vote.
Force-fed.
Yeah, please.
Jailed.
Right near here.
Yeah, we're standing on their shoulders.
Yes, absolutely.
Hopefully about to make history here
It gives
in
you
Virginia.
goosies, doesn't
It
it just
does.
gives you goosebumps.
Absolutely. I hope we're all together, you know, popping champagne corks, you know, on the steps of the Capitol, celebrating come this January, February.
No, we've never seen this much diversity with the Equal Rights Amendment, and maybe Ainsley, you can jump in here. You know, when I decided to champion it, it was because of my history with women's rights. I've been working for campaigns as a super volunteer for 10 years. And mine started in 2008, where Obama was running, Hillary was running, and I was like, yes, women are gonna break the glass ceiling, girl power. And then it just changed to another dynamic, which I am very pleased with, because I love Obama just as much as I loved Hillary. But this year you see this intersectionality coming to the forefront, where we didn't feel like we had a voice at the table, right? We didn't feel like we were part of the conversation.
Yeah. I was also like a super volunteer with the Jennifer Wexton campaign. I started out in April with the primary and went all the way through until the very last day. We were working probably 14-hour days, knocking doors in the morning, entering data, and then I was a fellow with her campaign for all the candidates in Northern Virginia. And it really showed me, like, we've gone so far in such a short amount of time, and we still have so far to go. And we've gone from, like, my personal hero, Alice Paul, to suddenly I'm working on the same movement that she was in, which is just a crazy concept to me. Probably just a year ago today, I wouldn't have believed it if I knew that this is where I'd be.
Did you ever think that, you know, the misnomer is that those who are numerically more mature don't understand that those who may not be equal in that numeric status, I'm balancing this, that they don't know that there's not equal rights. Like if we use the term millennials, not to offend anyone, but they'll say millennials think we already have equal rights. They think we are already afforded. What do you think the disconnect or the conversation?
Well, I'm 17, so I'm significantly younger than
Are
a
you
lot
really?
of than a lot of my representatives. And I think there's like a disconnect between the generations of the problems that people like our representatives' age see versus the problems that I see, because it's a totally different viewpoint that we're going at with this. So part of the Equal Rights Amendment would be like the age gap, like
It would like bridge
yeah,
the
yeah,
disconnect, right?
bridge the disconnect between
Yeah.
that.
And it's not even just millennials, because I think
That's what I-
millennials are more informed even, right? Because some of the older generation, they already think we have ERA,
Yeah.
and in fact we don't. And I think what's so exciting about this too is in the wake of the Me Too movement, we find, or I really believe that there's a connection between the lack of equality and violence against women. So I think this is such monumental for us to be able to change the paradigm.
Absolutely. You touch on a great point, and maybe you can chime in, Julia. You know, when you say we already have equal rights, people tell me all the time, I'm carrying this bill. They were like, Delegate Ayala, we already have equal rights. I'm like,
Technically,
Right.
well,
Not really.
Yeah, we don't for a lot of reasons. I mean, we can see it, with the Me Too movement and with the fact that harassment laws are not adequately enforced. We can see it in the wage gap, which still persists, even in the same job category often. But the reasons for it, I think, are twofold. Number one, if it was in the Constitution, every school child would learn it as they're going through school. And it would, I think, really infuse the culture with this understanding that we should all have equal legal rights. When they grow up to be judges and are on juries, this would, I think, really transform our culture. But also, to get technical for a minute, in the law, there is a difference. So if we have the Equal Rights Amendment, most legal scholars believe that women would, sex discrimination would receive a closer degree of judicial scrutiny. So if there's discrimination based on race or religion or national origin, right now, those types of discriminatory laws receive very careful examination by courts. And if the Equal Rights Amendment is passed, then sex discrimination by the government would similarly receive this more careful level of review, which in turn would elevate the number of times in which, for example, the laws are enforced. So it would have a lot of beneficial effects.
so break this down to me as if I'm a fifth grader, because we have to translate that into daily terms, and maybe you can chime in too. When somebody says, well, what about the Lilly Ledbetter Act? What about the Voting Rights Act? What about the 14th, 15th, 16th, 20th Amendment? I was like, wait a minute. Think of it as a contract. If it's not stated, it's not prohibited.
Exactly.
And it can be changed.
And it
That's
can
right.
be changed.
And
to
that,
be
I think, is the
repealed.
reason we want the Constitution, as well as the legal protections that are really inherent to the ERA. And you could argue that discrimination might be covered with the 14th Amendment. You might be able, in certain cases, but not in sexual assault cases and others. And so legal protections for women, or to really men and boys and girls, all of the people are affected by the results of the Equal Rights Amendment going into the Constitution.
I think we'll study this more and see this show up more in our history books. I remember when I read about suffragists, right? It was a few pages at best, right? Along with Amelia Earhart, right? There wasn't this dedicated chapter. And so I think we can help promulgate that by having the Equal Rights Amendment. And without it being in the Constitution, there is no legal teeth. We need that's the bedrock, the fundamental document of American society. And if we can see that, right, in the Constitution in plain English, I think that will afford us a different way of thinking about ourselves as women.
Most people pay attention when you say it's constitutional law.
Right.
And they might change their behavior as a result of it. because that is, the Constitution has teeth in it. And somebody's going to follow through if you're going to violate the Constitution. And so the thought of possibly doing that might allow people to withdraw from an action that would be very hurtful anyway.
Very hard to change laws too,
Yes, yes.
if it's an amendment to the Constitution. You can't just repeal it
Right.
or change your mind and roll it back, right?
Well, you know, we've seen some very interesting things
we
in this
have.
climate, so I agree with you.
Yes.
However, we've seen some anomalies. So let's talk about the law itself and, you know, what happens when we ratify it? What happens? If Virginia becomes that 38th state, what's going to happen? You know, we talk about this all the time. Delegate Carol Foy is the champion of this bill. She'll be the first African-American woman to champion this in the House of Delegates. And me being the
Goosebumps
first,
again.
yeah, and me chief co-patron, the first Latina to do this. This is a big discussion because when we talk about our history books and the Constitution, they don't necessarily encapsulate diversity
Right.
or women, right? We're here. And what do you think that projection is? Like when I talk, I know I talk from a personal experience, right? How do you view it?
I like to say that you want people to represent the population. So rather than exclude people from it. And excluding women under the ERA from the U.S. Constitution really keeps them from getting the true equal rights. I mean, it says it right there in the title. And so that's a very important step to make. And to say that we need to bring Republicans and Democrats, independents together on this. And I think the poll from the Christopher Newport, the Wason Center is a critical component to this because 81% of the people in Virginia support
81%,
this, and it's the most enthusiastic support of any issue that they ask them about.
More than the tax cut.
Yes, yes, more than a tax cut.
Exactly.
Yes, and I think that's a very important point to make so that when you sponsor the bill or when you have the bill before the legislature, you want to have as many people co-patroning it as possible from both sides of the aisle. Because one of the difficulties I had in the General Assembly was getting the other side to be a co-patron. Those who were inclined to do it we didn't want them to stick their necks out necessarily unless somebody else was with them. And because they really did bear the brunt of it on many, many issues. And so the legislature will have a Republican and Democrat this year. And that's terrific. That's exactly, and then get more and more and more as co-patrons.
So I think to your point, education, you know, you've done some amazing grassroots work, you know, with VA Ratify ERA, with, you know, please help me with the name WUFA.
We have action.
We have action, yes, ma'am. And then National Organization for Women, and so many coalesced and said, look, we're going to move this forward in a bipartisan way because equality isn't a partisan issue, right? But we still have to combat the consciousness and dialogue about why. It's bizarre to me in 2018 that we're still talking about discrimination against gender or race or who we love or our religion, et cetera, et cetera. But when we come back to the ERA, it's baffling to me because it's almost as our fellow GOP members do not know our history. Like, they supported the ERA.
You know, I think
They
that's the
introduced
thing.
it.
And I think a lot of the lawmakers now say that they do want equal rights for women. I think that some of the fears that we hear actually are not things that the ERA would affect. A lot of them have actually already become commonplace in America. They've already become the law without the ERA in place. So what the ERA really would impact is women's lives and men's lives too. A great deal of the case law has been helping men to ensure that as caregivers, as military spouses, they receive their due as well. And it is inclusive in so many ways. So both sexes, you know, when you have the genders covered, I think it's good that we have inclusivity of lawmakers as representing all of the people in Virginia.
Absolutely.
You know, all races. I think it should not be leaving anyone out. We don't want to leave anyone behind.
You
And
know,
it affects the family's bottom line too, right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Right. men and women. If you're when you're married, right, your husband should want his wife to be as successful and be able to make the same amount of money as he does, because it impacts the household bottom line.
Right?
Yes.
Absolutely, it's an economic
If we're
argument.
making a dollar for a dollar, you know, compared to our white male counterparts,
That's right.
This is really enriching the lives of our family and our community, and you know, our retirement, and you know, everybody wins. And I have had a conversation with and maybe Ainsley, you can jump in here, where we talked to individuals about the Equal Rights Amendment on a spectrum of age, race, religion, and they think it's a zero-sum game. They say, if you do this, you won't get this, right? Or if we get this, you won't get this. Or it's some dog whistle they add to this. What do you think about those conversations? Like, how do you interact with those?
I live in a more conservative part of Northern Virginia,
Okay.
so a lot of times I'm having interactions with my peers where they go after me and insult the ideas that I support purely because I have different political views from them. So the biggest problem that we're seeing isn't that they don't per se support the Equal Rights Amendment, it's they don't understand it.
That's right. That's well said.
Well said.
And also, I was reading a story about Ellie Peterson, who was a co-chair of, she was the Republican co-chair of ERA America with the Democrat Liz Carpenter. And she was in constant conflict with Phyllis Schlafly. Interestingly, Ellie is from Illinois originally, and so is Phyllis Schlafly, and so am I. And there was I always had this embarrassment because I kept thinking, this is, you know, that point of view that really puts forth misstatements and threats and fear about this is going to, mothers will kill their children, and they'll have unisex bathrooms.
Fake news was
and
new.
yes, yeah, right, exactly.
It started with
and,
Phyllis Schlafly.
Yes, but what Ellie said was, sometimes in political parties you find people who are cannot be elected to the party or a government position, so they have to have a platform and they have to have an issue, so they come forward with one that's completely different because they're going to get the attention. And she, you know, she was pretty tough in her criticism of Phyllis Schlafly, but she also kept working with her bipartisan person, Liz Carpenter, in order to put forth the issues that were very much truthful and needed to be said and explained to people. And they got a lot of support. The main problem at that time, and that was in the late 70s, was that many people had promised to bring forth money for the campaign. And they decided, they got a little cold feet, and they didn't have the money to put forth the program that they had planned. So that was a tough thing, I think. But when you think back to all this crazy statements that have been said, and fear has been the number one, and you know, we even have some of that today, not necessarily with ARA, but it works with people.
Well,
They'll
you'd
use
be
it as an
surprised.
excuse.
The Schlafly, the Family Foundation in Virginia is steadily at work. We have former Delegate Bob Marshall, who is carrying on the spirit of Schlafly throughout the General Assembly and misinforming. And we've tried to share the educational parts. We've tried to talk about that. But before we go down that path, I'd like to know, what was your first realization that you didn't have equal rights? Like, I know we have a generational form here, right? So how did you, I'd be interested to hear, like, I understand, you know, you running for office, getting elected, and how did you come to the realization that you didn't have equal rights?
Well, I was much older when I was elected, so, but I can sort of identify, I came to Arlington 47 years ago, and at that time I was single and wanted to get an apartment and wanted to get a credit card for shopping and stuff, and you had to have the husband sign for you, and or a parent, and I had, you know, neither of those handy, and so I was able to get my own account, but it took a little bit of time and effort and some understanding on the part of the
We've
people.
come far in some of our laws
When
that
you
we wouldn't
think
give
about that,
women the right to own credit.
Yes,
Or a
to
bank
their
account.
own credit. It's just extraordinary.
It is.
You
Absolutely.
can buy your own house either, right?
Absolutely.
Yes, yeah.
Ainsley, did you have a defining moment when you started to connect with the Equal Rights Amendment?
I don't think it was one defining moment, but it was a million little things throughout my life, starting with in second grade when someone would have to like carry something heavy and someone would be like, can we get a big strong boy to help us carry this box in? And I'd always raise my hand to help and I'd never get chosen. All the way up till now when I'm seeing myself like, I do have certain rights that my peers don't have purely because I'm an upper middle class white kid. And a really good friend of mine is a low income Puerto Rican immigrant. So just like she's one of my good friends, and I see a really big disconnect between the rights that we have. So with what I have, I'm fighting just as much to get myself equal rights as much as the people who have less than me.
You're an ally.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Another way, though, that you can sort of lay the groundwork for it is in the late 80s and into the 90s, the Virginia Education Association had workshops in the schools for teachers primarily and teaching assistants. And it was to work with the use of language with kids. You talk about, if I say to you, the mailman did such and such, most children will envision boys or men. If you say fireman, the same kind of thing will occur. Boys and girls will think of the male gender.
Instead of firefighter.
Yes, and so it was one of those revelations to many teachers about, oh my word, I never thought about that before, because they were doing the same kind of thing. But if you say letter carrier or mail carrier or firefighter, and television has done a lot to change their terminology as well, that broadens the spectrum. It also makes people more on a level playing field.
Absolutely. Julia, do you have a defining ERA moment?
It was probably in college when I was taking a computer science class and realized, and this is such a small issue, but I realized that the lab assistant would only talk with the young men in the class, and he would not talk with me. I was the only young woman in the class. And I learned later that he was afraid of women. It was very odd, but I suddenly realized that just because I was a woman, it was hindering my education, which was difficult. Can I chime in with one point relating to one more reason why the ERA would be wonderful is because it also brings about greater profits for businesses and for our economy. And I just think that's an important point. Deloitte, Ernst & Young, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and McKinsey have all...
Apple, AOL, Google. I'm just the techie in the room.
Absolutely. Well, I'm just saying that they've done studies and they've found that it improves net profits for corporations and GDP
Amazon
for the economy. And therefore, that is the reason why all of these tech companies have these amazing gender equality programs because they've reviewed these studies.
They've really done their climate study and say, look, you know, these rising women, you know, who may not have had these opportunities. I'm in tech, so I'll talk about that after we get your story. But it just wasn't as diverse. And you know, I had a very similar situation where I was just kind of, you know, looked over simply because of my anatomy and gender. But I agree, we are a thriving economy when all have an opportunity.
And I think it's one of the reasons actually HQ2 has decided to move here, right?
So talk about your ERA moment, and then maybe you can weave that into the HQ2.
Sure, thank you. So for me, it was relatively recent because I was born and raised in a state, California, that ratified when I was a baby, right?
California.
So living here now for my second stint here, living here, working on 13 years. I was invited as a Fairfax County Commissioner on the Commission for Women. I was invited to a National Association of Commissioners conference in Los Angeles, of all places. And I was sitting with the Nevada delegation and the Illinois delegation, and Camila Lopez was up on the podium, and she was talking about how we don't have equal rights yet. And I thought to myself, I looked around, and I thought, okay. And she said, yes, 13 states haven't ratified. I thought to myself, how ignorant am I, first of all?
You're being punked right at the delegate.
Right? I thought that, and I thought, which darn states are those? And when I heard Virginia, I wanted the table to open up and swallow me in, right?
Wow.
So I came immediately running back and said, okay, what can I do and how can I make it happen? And so it really resonated and stunned me all at once. So I got educated fast.
I must say, she is educated very fast, and you have been, along with many others, on that playing field with the VA Ratify ERA movement, which has just picked this grassroots movement up and revived it and brought it to the forefront. Because from the beginning, we just talked about Virginia being the 38th state. Could you imagine? I mean, we made history in 2017, electing and starting this wave of
And this
women
Congress
and
now.
this Congress
Yes.
and this voice that said women are now taking the bull by the horns and saying no more.
That's right. Putting our foot down.
And putting our foot down. And it's a beautiful thing, right? When I experienced the understanding of inequity, I was so angry. I said, you know, I knew what it was like to feel like a person of color and to be treated that much differently just by race alone. And then I knew that because I was a girl that I wasn't expected to do certain jobs or be into certain fields, and I've always was challenging the status quo. So I think that encapsulated my experience, and I started advocating for women. So for 10 years, I was like, equal work for equal pay. This impacts everything from our livelihood, our health care, to everything we were talking about.
And I think another important point about that, Hala, is by having a federal equal rights amendment, it's exemplary in that we say it impacts only the federal government, but the truth is that what happens at the federal government level gets modeled by other businesses and changes culture incrementally. And so we may not be impacted, but you will be, and your daughters and your granddaughters, right? And so I feel like we have to fight for that.
This is so great. We have all of this zhuzh going on. And I couldn't find the word. Let me ask you ladies a question, if I may. We are in session. Jennifer is standing up, talking about the Equal Rights Amendment. I'm going to bring you fast forward to the future, and we're arguing this on the floor. I know I'm going to barely keep it together, so I'm going to look for your faces up there in the gallery, and it passes. Oh, gosh. It passes. The button goes green. Men finally stood up and said, yes, we're with you.
Right.
What are you going to do, Julia?
Celebrate.
I'm going to turn to hug you. Then I'm going to jump and hug you.
Yes, it would be fantastic. Oh my gosh, can you
I mean, can't you just
imagine?
feel that?
Yes, the energy, the excitement. Yes.
The green button. We have enough votes to put women in the Constitution. How does that feel to you?
It sounds almost possible now, which I think I really have that belief now. And what I think is interesting is today I know that we were sort of primed on the Human Rights Day, and that it's kind of nice to know that the whole world, thanks to the United Nations, when it was done the year that it started in 1948. So today we have the 70th anniversary, and that says equal rights for men and women internationally, and it's the community of the world that has to be the monitor on that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
And we want to be able to be in the same category as the world.
Absolutely. What do you think, Ainsley? What will you do?
I'm almost crying just thinking about it. I'm going to be so happy when this happens. And I firmly believe that it will happen in this upcoming session.
So with closing thoughts, ladies, thank you for joining me on my journey with Jennifer Carroll Foy, and we look forward to our next assembly. You have some closing words?
I do. I have a very short part of a speech that Jill Ruckelshaus gave to the California Convention of the National Women's Political Caucus in 1977, when this was all being discussed. We are in for a very, very long haul. I am asking for everything you have to give. We will never give up. You will lose your youth, your sleep, your patience, your sense of humor, and occasionally the understanding and support of people that you love very much. In return, I have nothing to offer you but your pride in being a woman and all your dreams you've ever had for your daughters and nieces and granddaughters, your future, and the certain knowledge that at the end of your days you will be able to look back and say that once in your life you gave everything for justice. That's right. And I think that says it all.
Yes. Delegate Ayala. Hi, everyone. I'm coming to you for the PSA for ERA. I hope you enjoyed our latest episode of In Conversation. And this has been an exciting moment in my life to be on the precipice of history. Virginia could be that 38th state, but it can't stop right now. January 9th, we are going into session. We don't know when our bill will be heard, HJ 579, but we hope you'll join us in the fight.
And here's what you can do to join the movement. Go to va-ratifyera.org/petition. And there's a whole slew of information where you can help us advocate for the Equal Rights Amendment in Virginia and make us the 38th state.
Absolutely. We'll see you on the other side of history.